The wind howled across the barren plains of Erythra Prime, carrying a fine red dust that coated everything it touched. Captain Elias Hayes squinted against the grit, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the sleek cannon mounted atop the colony's tallest ridge. A marvel of human ingenuity and desperation, the cannon was cobbled together from scraps of old mining equipment and salvaged starship parts. To most, it looked like a haphazard mess. To Elias, it was humanity's first real chance at survival. Status? Elias barked, his voice cutting through the wind. A young engineer, Petra Vance, leaned out from behind the cannon's housing, her goggles smeared with grease. We're almost there. Just running final diagnostics. If this thing overheats, it's going to blow. Elias smirked. If this thing works, it doesn't matter if it blows after. Just make sure it fires first. The colony's scanners had picked up the Imperial fleet hours ago, a string of massive warships descending like silent predators. Panic had swept through the colony like wildfire. People packed what little they owned and rushed to the underground bunkers, their faces pale with fear. Everyone had heard the stories, how the Galactic Empire's ships were untouchable, their energy shields impervious to any known weapon. No one fought the Empire and lived. Except, maybe, today. Elias turned to his second-in-command, a grizzled ex-soldier named Marcus Kane. What's our evac status? Half the colony's underground. The rest are either praying or arguing about surrender. Marcus grunted, his voice heavy with disdain. We don't have time to convince them all. Either that cannon works, or we're all dead. That's the spirit, Elias muttered, his tone dry. A piercing alarm sounded, cutting through the air like a blade. Petra cursed and scrambled to a nearby terminal. They're here! First ships entering the atmosphere! Elias felt his heart pound, but his voice remained steady. All right, people, this is it. Petra, are we good to go? Diagnostics complete, she replied, her hands flying over the controls. It's ugly, but it'll fire. Ugly's our specialty, Elias said. He climbed into the gunner's seat, the cannon's controls crude but functional beneath his hands. He adjusted the targeting interface, locking onto the rapidly descending Imperial warship. It was massive, a gleaming, obsidian wedge that seemed to drink in the light. The ship exuded power and arrogance, a symbol of the Empire's unchecked dominance. Marcus leaned in, his voice low. You sure about this, Hayes? One shot, one chance. Elias didn't look away from the targeting screen. I didn't spend 6 months building this thing to miss. The comms crackled to life, and a voice filled with cold authority echoed across the colony. This is Lord Zython Valkorus of the Galactic Empire. Surrender immediately, and your lives will be spared. Resistance will be met with annihilation. Elias keyed the open channel, his voice laced with defiance. This is Captain Elias Hayes of Erythra Prime. If you want us, come and get us. The silence that followed was deafening. The Imperial ship slowed, hovering ominously over the plains as its weapons systems activated. Bright blue energy crackled along its hull, the promise of destruction. Here we go, Elias murmured, tightening his grip on the controls. He thumbed the trigger. The cannon roared, a deafening blast that sent shockwaves rippling through the air. The projectile, a solid slug of reinforced tungsten, streaked toward the ship, glowing red-hot as it punched through the atmosphere. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the slug hit. The impact was catastrophic. The Imperial ship's energy shield flared, struggling to absorb the kinetic force, but the slug tore through like a hammer through glass. A fiery explosion erupted from the ship's side, and it began to list, smoke pouring from the gaping wound. Cheers erupted from the colony's defenders, a sound of disbelief and triumph. Elias allowed himself a grim smile as he watched the mighty warship shudder and fall, crashing into the plains with a thunderous boom that shook the ground. Holy! Petra's voice cracked as she stared at the wreckage. We actually did it! Elias stood, his expression hardening. Don't celebrate yet. That was one ship. They'll be sending more. As if on cue, the scanners lit up with new signals. 3 more Imperial ships were descending, their trajectories precise and unyielding. Petra's hands trembled as she adjusted the cannon systems. "We don't have time to reload. The barrel's already overheating." Marcus swore under his breath. "What's the plan, Hayes? We can't take them all." "We don't have to," Elias said, his mind racing. "Not yet. If we can take out one more, we might force them to reconsider an all-out assault. Petra, get that barrel cooled. Marcus, round up anyone who can hold a weapon. We're going to give them a fight they'll remember." "And if they don't reconsider?" Marcus asked grimly. Elias turned to face him, his jaw set. "Then we make them bleed for every inch they take." The comms crackled again, Valcorus's voice sharper this time. "You've made your point, human. A lucky shot does not make you a threat. Stand down now, or face annihilation." Elias keyed the comms, his voice steady. "That wasn't luck, Valcorus. That was us telling you the rules just changed." Silence. Then the Imperial ships began to move, spreading into an attack formation. The colony braced for impact, their fragile hope now a flickering flame against the storm to come. Elias looked out over the plains, his mind already calculating the next move. Humanity had always been underestimated, dismissed as insignificant by the galaxy's great powers. But today, they had proven one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The wreckage of the first Imperial warship still smoldered on the Crimson Plains when the next 3 broke through the clouds. Their sleek, black hulls glinted under Erythra Prime's pale sun as they spread into a tight formation. Each one was a deadly monument to the Empire's dominance, bristling with weapons designed to end rebellions before they could begin. From his vantage point near the cannon, Elias Hayes wiped sweat from his brow, scanning the horizon through his binoculars. The roar of approaching engines sent a shiver through the ground, vibrating underfoot. Behind him, Petra Vance was frantically cooling the cannon, her hands moving so fast over the controls they were a blur. 2 minutes until the barrel's operational again," Petra called, her voice tight with panic. Elias nodded, lowering the binoculars. "That's about a minute longer than we have." Marcus Kane jogged up, his rifle slung across his chest and his face grim. "Got 50 people armed and spread out across the ridge. Most of them barely know which end of the rifle to hold, but they'll fight. They'll have to." Elias's voice was steady, but his mind was a whirlwind of calculations. The odds were laughable: 3 Imperial ships against a colony armed with scraps and desperation. But laughing wasn't going to save anyone. The comms unit on his wrist buzzed to life, and a familiar, cold voice cut through the static. "Captain Hayes, I commend your ingenuity, but your defiance has run its course. Lay down your arms, and I will show mercy. Resist, and I will ensure your colony becomes an example for the galaxy." Elias pressed the transmit button, his tone sharp. "You don't know much about humans, do you, Valcorus? We don't lay down. Not for you. Not for anyone." A pause followed, and Elias could almost hear the disdain dripping from the Imperial Admiral's words. "Then you leave me no choice." The first ship opened fire. A bright blue beam of energy sliced through the sky, scorching a deep trench into the ground just meters from the cannon. Elias staggered but didn't fall, barking orders over the comms. "Petra, status. Still cooling. Another 30 seconds." Elias swore under his breath. "Marcus, tell the Ridge crew to concentrate fire on the lead ship. Distract them. Make them think we've got more up here than we actually do." Marcus nodded and disappeared into the chaos. Moments later, gunfire erupted across the ridge. Small arms fire pinged harmlessly off the Imperial shields, but the distraction worked. The lead ship slowed, pivoting to focus on the ground troops. Elias turned back to Petra. "Now or never, Vance!" Petra slammed her fist onto the console. "It's ready! But the barrel's still hot. If we fire now, we might only get one more shot before it blows for good." Elias climbed into the gunner's seat without hesitation. "One shot's all we need." He adjusted the targeting controls, locking onto the lead ship. It was closer now, its shields glowing faintly as it absorbed the barrage from the ridge. Elias took a deep breath, steadying his hands. "Firing in 3, he called. 2, 1. The cannon roared to life, the recoil nearly throwing him from the seat. The tungsten slug streaked toward the ship, burning through the air like a meteor. The impact was instantaneous and devastating. The slug pierced the shields, striking the ship's central reactor. A blinding explosion lit up the sky, and the lead ship split in two, debris raining down onto the plains. Cheers erupted from the ridge, but they were short-lived. The remaining 2 ships broke formation, their movements precise and calculated. One climbed higher, positioning itself for a devastating orbital strike. The other veered toward the ridge, its weapons firing relentlessly. Elias jumped from the cannon as an energy blast obliterated a section of the ridge. He hit the ground hard, rolling to avoid the wave of heat and debris. "Marcus, report. We're getting torn apart out here." Marcus's voice crackled over the comms. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." Elias gritted his teeth and scrambled back to Petra, who was already inspecting the cannon. "Can we fire again?" Petra shook her head, her face pale. "The barrel's fried. We'll be lucky if it doesn't explode the next time we try." "Then we make it count," Elias said, gripping her shoulder. "Fix it enough for one last shot." "I don't care how." Petra hesitated, then nodded, diving back into the machinery. Elias turned his gaze skyward. The ship preparing the orbital strike loomed large, its underside glowing as it charged its weapon. He keyed his comms again. "Valkoris, is this the best you've got? Hiding behind your shields while we tear through your fleet?" Valkoris's laugh was cold and humorless. "Bravado will not save you, Captain. You've delayed the inevitable, nothing more." Elias cut the channel. Every second he kept Valkoris talking was another second Petra had to finish the repairs. Another explosion rocked the ridge as the second ship unleashed a barrage, scattering the defenders. Elias rushed to Marcus's position, dropping into cover beside him. "We can't hold much longer," Marcus growled, firing a burst from his rifle. "We don't have to," Elias replied. "We just need the cannon ready." As if on cue, Petra's voice crackled over the comms. "It's as good as it's gonna get. But if this shot doesn't hit, we're toast." Elias didn't waste a second. "Marcus, cover me!" He sprinted back to the cannon, dodging fire and debris. The controls were sluggish, barely responding, but he managed to lock onto the ship preparing the orbital strike. He keyed the comms one last time. "Hey, Valkoris! Catch this!" The cannon fired, its final shot tearing through the atmosphere. The projectile struck the ship's weapon array, triggering a chain reaction. The orbital weapon detonated, consuming the entire ship in a fiery explosion. Elias slumped in the gunner's seat, watching the burning wreckage fall from the sky. The second ship hesitated, its captain clearly shaken. Moments later, it turned and retreated, vanishing into the clouds. The ridge fell silent, save for the crackle of fires and the distant groan of settling debris. Marcus approached, his rifle resting on his shoulder. "We did it," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "For now," Elias replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He knew the Empire wouldn't give up that easily. This was just the beginning. He turned to the survivors gathering around him, their faces weary but determined. "They'll be back," he said, his voice firm. "And we'll be ready." Smoke hung in the air like a shroud as the survivors of Erythra Prime's colony gathered near the ridge. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional crackle of burning wreckage. Elias Hayes stood at the edge of the cannon, his face streaked with soot and resolve. The retreat of the last Imperial ship was a victory, but it felt hollow. He knew better than to hope for an end to the fight. Marcus Kane approached, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. "Casualty reports in," he said grimly. "We lost 34. Most of them on the ridge. Half of the survivors are injured." Elias nodded, the weight of those numbers pressing against his chest. "And the cannon?" "Dead," Petra Vance called from the base of the ridge. She climbed up to join them, her grease-streaked hands dangling at her sides. The last shot melted the barrel completely. If we want another, we'll need weeks to rebuild, materials we don't have, time we can't afford. We'll figure something out, Elias replied, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. He gazed out at the scorched landscape, his mind racing. What's the status of our communication array? Still down, Petra said. We've been working on restoring it, but it's slow going. The jamming signal from that first ship fried half the circuits. Elias's jaw tightened. Then we're cut off from the rest of the sector. Marcus crossed his arms. That means reinforcements aren't coming. Not that I expected any. We don't need reinforcements, Elias said, his voice firm. We need to hold. Petra frowned, brushing a stray strand of hair out of her face. Hold against what? The Empire knows we're here now. They'll send more ships, bigger ones, too. We can't fight them off with rifles and broken scrap. Elias turned to her, his gaze steady. We held them off today. That's not just luck, it's proof we can do it again. Barely, Marcus muttered. Petra hesitated. If we can't rebuild the cannon, what's the plan? We can't rely on improvisation every time they show up. Elias considered her words, his mind working through possibilities. We use what we have, he said finally. Turn their arrogance against them. The Empire's strength is also its greatest weakness. They think they're untouchable. Today proved them wrong. That's a message they'll hear, whether they admit it or not. Before anyone could respond, a sharp beep sounded from Petra's comm device. She snatched it from her belt, her eyes widening as she scanned the screen. Incoming transmission, she said, her voice rising with a mix of fear and hope. From who? Elias asked. It's not Imperial, it's local, Petra replied. She adjusted the comm unit, her hands trembling. I think it's from the Resistance. The words sent a jolt through Elias. He leaned in as the device crackled to life, a distorted voice emerging from the static. This is Commander Alina Karev of the Free Star Alliance. We received reports of Imperial activity on Erythra Prime and detected an energy signature consistent with a high-impact kinetic strike. If anyone can hear this, respond immediately. Elias grabbed the comm unit. This is Captain Elias Hayes, leader of Erythra Prime's colony defense. We've engaged the Empire and repelled their initial assault. What's your status, Commander? A pause followed, then Karev's voice returned, more focused now. Captain Hayes, your colony isn't alone. The Empire's tightening its grip across the sector, but resistance cells are mobilizing. Your actions today didn't go unnoticed, you've given people hope. Elias exchanged a glance with Marcus and Petra, both of whom seemed equally stunned. Hope's good, but we need more than that. Supplies, weapons, reinforcements, we're hanging on by a thread here. Understood, Karev said. We can't send much, but I'll dispatch a supply ship with weapons and medical aid. We'll also provide intel on Imperial movements. It's not much, but it's a start. Elias allowed himself a small smile. A start's all we need. Thank you, Commander. Karev's voice softened slightly. Don't thank me yet, Captain. The Empire doesn't take rebellion lightly. If they know you've joined the Resistance, they'll stop at nothing to crush you. Be ready for what's coming. The transmission ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Marcus broke it with a low whistle. Well, that's one way to paint a target on our backs. We already had a target, Elias said, pocketing the comm unit. At least now, we've got allies. Petra sat down on a nearby rock, exhaling heavily. So, what's the plan? Do we just wait for the Empire to show up again and hope for the best? Elias shook his head. We don't wait. We prepare. If the Resistance can get us supplies, we'll use them to reinforce our defenses. Set traps, build redundancies, anything to make it harder for the Empire to take us out. And when they come back? Marcus asked. Elias met his gaze, his voice unwavering. We make them regret it. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The colony's survivors worked tirelessly to fortify their position, using every scrap of material they could find. Trenches were dug, barriers erected, and makeshift explosives crafted from mining charges. The cannon, though irreparable, was dismantled for parts that could be repurposed into smaller weapons. Petra led a team of engineers in repairing the communication array, working day and night despite the constant threat of Imperial return. Marcus trained the colony's defenders, drilling them relentlessly until even the most inexperienced fighters could hold their own. Elias spent his time coordinating efforts, his mind always a step ahead. He knew the next assault wouldn't be like the first. The Empire would come back stronger, and their only chance of survival lay in outthinking their enemy. Late one night, as the colony settled into an uneasy quiet, Elias stood on the ridge, staring at the stars. The wreckage of the first Imperial ship loomed in the distance, a grim reminder of what they were up against. Petra approached, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. "The comm array's back online," she said. "Karev's supply ship should reach us within 48 hours. Elias nodded, his gaze still fixed on the sky. "Good. We'll need everything they've got." Petra hesitated, then stepped closer. "Do you think we can really do this? Fight the Empire and win?" Elias turned to her, his expression calm but determined. "I don't know if we'll win. But I know we can fight. And as long as we fight, we've got a chance." She smiled faintly, the weight of the moment settling between them. "You're good at this, you know. Keeping people together. Giving them something to believe in." Elias chuckled, a dry sound. "If I'm being honest, Petra, half the time I'm just making it up as I go." "Then keep making it up," she said. "Because it's working." Elias nodded, returning his gaze to the stars. Somewhere out there, the Empire was regrouping, planning their next move. But for the first time, humanity wasn't just surviving, they were fighting back. And that, Elias thought, was worth everything.